hột gà nướng, hột vịt lộn, hột vịt sữa, trứng cút lộn, mất xào đây.
So anyone who's lived in Saigon will know that the expat world is relatively small, and that today's guest is a great example of that because I'd heard his name before, had been mentioned to me as a singer-songwriter by J.K. Hobson, previous guest on the show. But I'd never met him before, and then I saw him just last week perform at the House of Royalty and tell a really funny, entertaining story, which we might hear a little bit of. And then, out of the blue, just a few days ago, he messaged me through Ella Beth, who's another previous guest, has a bit of a connection, and we got talking, and he's now a guest on 7 Million Bikes, a Saigon podcast. So thank you for joining me, Stewart Gatsi.
It's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for reaching out. It's always exciting when someone wants to be part of the show.
Yeah. I mean, I heard a lot of good things, and I felt like I definitely used to be a part of it, be a part of the good work.
You don't need to say that. You don't need to butter me up.
I was thinking maybe dinner and a movie.
So you're originally from Zimbabwe, and you told a very entertaining story about that. And when I first saw you, do you want to just share that in a very brief way with our listeners?
Yeah. So I was born in Zimbabwe, as you know by now, and when I was young, I moved to the U.S. and so the entire experience exposed my lack of knowledge of the world, and then also at the same time, I discovered others people's lack of knowledge of the world. So I basically grew up in middle class Zimbabwe, which when people imagine Africa, they don't really think of a middle class. They think of the typical image: wild animals running around and maybe dentists from America coming around to shoot them. And so I moved to the U.S. I was about 17 at the time, just turned 17. And so I get a lot of weird questions. I'd gone there for school, so make friends, and then they'd start asking me strange questions. Like, where are you from? I would reply by saying, well, I'm from Zimbabwe. And the general response would be, but you speak so well. And that, things like that started to expose things to me about the world that I maybe thought I knew. I was certainly very naive about America, moving there. For example, I just, like everybody else living in the world, I just thought America was Hollywood. So I thought immediately when I got to America, I'd be rich, I'd have rims, I'd see all my WWE heroes that I grew up watching. And then I got there, I was like, oh, they're just people. Like us, they're rich people, they're poor people without running water even in rural Alabama. But these were all things that I realized I was uneducated about. And at the same time, I also saw the reverse in how people were uneducated about in Zimbabwe and Africa.
Interesting how it goes both ways, right?
Yeah. So it definitely does go both ways. And something like, for example, a very good friend of mine, he asked me, hey, Stewart, do you guys celebrate Thanksgiving in Zimbabwe? And so for him, this was a normal holiday, right? So he assumed that everybody had some form of Thanksgiving in their country. And at this point, I had reached a point where I just had enough with the silly questions in my mind. So I said to him very sarcastically, hey, Ryan, I understand what you mean and what you're trying to get at, but we didn't murder our native population, so we don't need to celebrate this holiday. And I said this with a smile on my face, so he wasn't too offended. He knew I was joking, but I'd reached a point where I just had it up to here. I was like, okay, enough is enough.
Well, the thing, I've lived in America, my wife's American, lots of American friends.
Yeah.
And so they'll all admit this as well. Well, especially the ones that you meet that have left America. There's two different types of Americans, right? There's the ones who have never left and the ones who have left. They're very, very different people, right?
Yeah.
And the ones who have left, I've not met one Trump supporter. who's left America, right? So that tells you everything. But they realise as well, that America is very insular, right? And they don't have that sense of, but because they're taught from a young age that they are the centre of not just the planet, of the universe. And so that question about Thanksgiving, I can completely see that happening because there's no self-awareness that, there's other cultures and other countries, and so.
Yeah, I think you mentioned a good point. But there are people, I think generally people from any country that travel more tend to be more exposed and more alert about and aware of these things. But you're right also in that, by and large, people living in America are taught and raised to think that we're the greatest country in the world, even with all the problems. I remember, hearing one guy say, the worst day in America doesn't beat the best day in the world in any other country. I didn't necessarily agree with that, but it shows that the mindset, generally speaking. But like you say as well, it's also a very diverse country. There are many Americans that travel now, which I think is a great thing.
Well, I've told my American friends, and I was telling someone that just this week actually, I can't remember who, and they were shocked, and they get shocked at this. But I think Americans are the friendliest people I've ever met. Like, without doubt, they're just so kind. They're just small things like, you get invited to their home, they open up their fridge, what do you want to eat? Can I drive you somewhere? Can I take you to the airport? Like, they never ask for gas money. That's probably because gas was so cheap when I lived there. Maybe it's different now. But, I just find them such a warm, friendly people. So again, when you have this stereotype that we see of Trump supporters or right-wing people or whatever, it's very diverse. And I am very bad at stereotyping them. I often do it for comedy. I know it's a joke, but it is a very, very large and diverse population, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And growing up in Kansas City, Missouri myself, I can attest to that. People are amazing. You're walking down the road, someone will be like, hey, how you doing? If I was in another country...
In Scotland, if you look at someone when you're walking down the street, they look at you and you go, what are you looking at? That's the difference, right? That's when I went to America, it's like, oh my God, they're all so friendly and nice. There's always a threat of violence in the air in Scotland, almost, so continue, sorry.
Yeah, no, it's okay. And that's true. It's growing up in the Midwest for me, used to that Midwestern hospitality, people I greet people. And one thing for me, for example, when I first moved to Kansas City when I was a kid, crossing the road, people would stop and allow me to cross and wave at me and smile at me. And initially, it's a little disconcerting because you think, okay, why is a random stranger greeting me and waving at me? Am I about to be robbed? What's going on? But in the end, I think it's just, good-natured people and a sense of community, basically.
I totally relate to that. You're kind of when you're you talking to me? So someone behind me? Who are you? Oh, you're saying hello to me? Yeah. But it's amazing. It's so beautiful, right? So tell me more about growing up in Zimbabwe, because that's so interesting what you're saying about growing up middle class, because just most people don't think of that. And I just read something this week, and they were just saying, stop with these ads. I think talking about in America and the UK of Africa being this poor children and then blah blah blah, and it's we have a thriving middle class, we have music and culture and art and all this stuff, but the rest of the world thinks it's just poverty porn is a big problem, right?
Yeah, and look, as is the case with other countries, Zimbabwe has its own unique sets of challenges. However, I think that there's maybe a lack of a spotlight on maybe some of the successes. To give you an example of the kind of environment I grew up in, my mom was an accountant and a businesswoman. She owned stocks and shares, just worked hard, and she herself had actually moved from rural Zimbabwe, and she put herself through school. She went to night school while she was working, and she kept progressing and growing. And we were fortunate, to grow up with a hardworking person like that. And so going to school, for me, by and large, I grew up going to British centered or British curriculum schools. Many of my teachers were from all over the world, Australia, England, the US. And we also were involved in many ways. I did a lot of sports. I loved playing soccer. When I was a kid, I did a little horse riding. And so that was just normal to me. And there are many other kids around me that grew up with very similar things. And then obviously now you then take that and you assume that the whole world knows that we that yes, there's a poor part of Africa, but there's also a thriving part in the middle class. But in traveling, you start to find out that it's not quite the case. For example, I traveled to Cambodia recently. I told you this story. I had to try and enter the country twice because the first time I got to the border, they told me, and I showed them my Zimbabwe passport. They told me, "I'm sorry, we've never heard of this country before." And in my mind, I was, I asked them, "Hey, can you check again? Are you sure?" But that's what I said. But in my mind, I was thinking, "Come on, guys, like just do a little Googling here. I can help you out." Yeah. So it's things like that, and obviously, then subsequently traveling to other countries, or I find myself having to educate people. I was in a job interview some time back, and I had to educate the person interviewing me that all my education from when I was a kid was done in English, and that English is the official language of Zimbabwe, which I found fascinating because this was somebody that worked for a highly respected institution. I would assume just a little research would have helped them. So there are things like that you've got to deal with, and so I think just being Zimbabwean comes with just being patient, unfortunately, because
There must be a lot of interest as well because I don't think I've met anyone from Zimbabwe before.
There are loads of us.
I'm sure.
We're everywhere.
Sure.
So obviously, with Zimbabwe experiencing its economic challenges in the '90s and carrying on into now, a big chunk of that middle class left and went to the UK, mostly Australia, the US, generally English-speaking countries. So obviously that plays a part, and people obviously will assimilate. And by and large, most of the Zimbabweans I know are just, they just get on with their lives, quiet, polite, and get on with it. It definitely does come with interest, but then also at the same time, it's confusing to some people, and I can understand why also.
Because of your English accent.
Right, yeah. So the way I speak obviously is affected by, where I've lived and my education and all that. And I should mention this. I did a public speaking course once when I was in college. And, for that period of time, my professor assigned me a speech coach. So we would sit there, and coming from the Zimbabwean and British education background, Americans thought I sounded British. I didn't think so, but hey. So my speech coach would sit there and say, "It's water, not water, water."
I mean, I still have this argument discussion with my wife on a weekly basis. So yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, just little things like that, or you're sitting with your friends and then you say something like, "Hey, I'm just gonna go sit on the bog for a moment." And you're like, "What? Don't you mean you're going to the bathroom?" So little things like that
Well, when I first went to America, I said, I'm going to the toilet.
Yeah.
And the family I was with was so, like, offended by that. And they're like, what do you mean? What does he mean he's going to the toilet? My friend was like, oh, well, he's going to the bathroom. Because Americans don't say that. Like, in the UK, we say, I'm going to the toilet.
Yeah.
But when she described it to me, I'm realizing, like, in their head, I'm literally going to the toilet, which means I'm going to the toilet bowl.
Oh, right.
No, I'm going to the bathroom. So there's these little things that you're like, oh yeah, if I say that incorrect, or if I say it differently, in their minds, they're hearing it like completely differently. You know.
Yeah.
Did you get tired, or are you still? Do you still get tired of having to have this conversation that I'm having with you right now?
Not at all, because it becomes more fun.
Do you ever make stuff up?
Yeah. So I met a guy.
Just to take the piss.
Yeah, because, I mean, you gotta have fun with it.
Yeah.
So I met a guy from Montana. I was still in Missouri at the time. And he was just so perplexed by just my existence. And he didn't understand how someone can come from Africa and have somewhat of a normal upbringing and a normal education, and then move to America and all this stuff. And so his question to me was, Stewart, how did you get here? So, like you say, at some point, like, you need to just start, taking it lightly, have fun with yourself. And I said, Michael, the truth is, I'm a prince, and my dad is the king of Zimbabwe. And then he stopped and he paused and he stared at me and he said, "Really?" And I said, "No, Michael, I'm joking. I'm not really a prince, okay?" So it's little moments like that, or someone would say, "Where are you from?" And then I'll tell them. And then they'd say, "But you speak so well." And then I would return, the favor and say, "Well, so do you."
Although you probably speak better than them, let's be honest. You know what I mean? Well, I get it often because I've lived in various countries around the world, and people will say, "Oh, so what brought you here?" And I'll look at them and go, "A plane?"
Or another good one is, how did you learn English? And so, I could go into an explanation of the entire history of Zimbabwean colonialism and how the British got to Africa and how there are still Caucasians in Africa, which is a whole nother kettle of fish that confuses people. So someone asked me, "Oh, how did you learn English?" Instead of explaining, I just turned to them and I said, "On the plane, we had tutors." And obviously because people don't know exactly how it works. Some may believe that. Yeah. And it's nice to kind of have fun with that. I think you have to. You have to take it lightly sometimes, because otherwise you go crazy.
Well, the reason I asked that was because when I lived in America, I got tired of it, because I lived in Rhode Island and I lived there for nearly 4 years. Nearly every time I would go into a shop or I'd go and order a coffee, it'd be like, "Oh my God, where are you from? How long have you lived here? What do you do for work? What do you do here?" And like those same kind of like basic questions. And in the beginning, it's like so exciting. It's like, "I'm from Scotland. I've just got here. I've been here 2 weeks. I'm working at a summer camp. Oh, it's so amazing. I love it here." But by like 2, 3, 4 years, you're like, "I just want my coffee. Like, can I please just get my coffee? I'm not in the mood to talk today. I've answered this question like 50 times." Now, you're nodding your head, so you've had this experience as well.
Yeah. And one thing I think as global nomads that you and I are, I think that we have become accustomed to that. I think that happens to us here in Vietnam.
Yeah. Have you noticed that? Because I think that as an expat, I've noticed that expats just don't ask those questions so
it's
much.
Like we kind of just assume that we're all in the same boat.
Yeah, so we just kind of get more. I feel like expats just skip past that kind of stuff and just start to get them to know the person or talk to the person as a a human being or whatever. I don't mean it to be so dramatic like that, but I feel like when you're an expat, it's not like, oh, where are you from? How did you get here? How long have you been? Like, yeah, those answers and questions will come out, but it's not like the.
Well, do you know what that is though? I think it's probably because people like you and I are minorities here, so we actually have a lot more shared experiences than we might first think. So I think as fellow travelers, you can relate to a lot of things, being away from home, maybe not having immediate family around and things like that. So what I do like then about Saigon is the sense of community that the expat community has.
Mm. So how long have you been in Saigon?
It's been 5 years this month.
Wow. Sweet. Yeah, I'm just four and a bit now. Yeah, it goes by fast, doesn't it?
Really does go by quick. When I came out to Vietnam, my intention initially was to go to Korea, South Korea, and I had been working at that time. I'd been working in Cape Town for a construction and engineering company. And we were building homes at the time, and so after working with them for a while, I realized that that's maybe not what I particularly wanted to do with my life. And I felt like I wanted to make more of a human impact. So I always had friends who were teaching in Southeast Asia. A lot of them were in Korea, some were in Japan, some were here. So for a while I had my sights set on Korea. And then I looked at my budget. I was like, wow, that's probably not going to happen. And so the next available option, which had been recommended by a friend who had lived in both Korea and Vietnam, was Vietnam itself. And I initially thought this would just be a temporary stepping stone. But then I found things that I liked about the place and things that worked well, and I was able to start out expanding on my music career, and also I became an author here in Ho Chi Minh City.
Well, yeah, I was going to ask about that. So you said, I liked when you said we were global nomads, right? And it's so true. And so you've written a book essentially about that, right?
Yeah.
So tell me more about your book.
Right. So the book is called Rough Guide to Planet Earth. And it is a memoir about myself living and traveling through 15 different countries. And to highlight some of them, including Zimbabwe, the US, Cyprus, Dubai, Vietnam. I also talk about touring Hong Kong, Singapore, Malaysia as well. And that's just to name a few. But the major, I think, there are a number of reasons actually why I decided to write a book. First and foremost, I think for people at home, for anyone who's traveling, we can always call home and tell them stories about what's happening, but I don't think that they get the full picture. So, for example, I arrived in Saigon. I'll never forget this date, September 15th, 2015. And I had transportation arranged. Transportation didn't show up. But luckily I had a friend, a good friend who was staying here. She was a lawyer. She's from San Francisco, and she was working for a law firm here. And so here I am at the airport. I take my selfie, post it on Instagram. Hey, I've arrived. I'm in Saigon. Everyone's like, yay. Then I put that down, and then I call Hillary. I'm like, hey, Hillary, my driver's not here to pick me up. Can you help? She's like, well, Stewart, it's time to put on your big boy pants. Find a taxi, don't pay above this amount, and go stay in a place called Bui Bien.
And just to add as well, 2015 is before Grab, Uber. There's no ride-hailing apps in 2015, so that's not even an option.
Right, yeah. So here I was on a Venus Sun taxi. And, And then obviously she sends me to like the wildest tourist spot in Ho Chi Minh City.
That should be its tagline.
Yeah, right. And so I asked, "Oh, Hillary, you coming? Am I gonna see you?" She's like, "No, sorry, I got work tomorrow. I'll see you later. I know you got this. You can take care of yourself." So in my mind, I'm like, "Damn, these are my friends. They take care of me at a distance." But anyway, so that was, and then I stayed on Hue Vien for a week, and I actually thought that the whole of Ho Chi Minh City was like Hue Vien Street.
I think I probably had a similar thought when I first arrived. Yeah.
Yeah. And then getting here and then readjusting, and then also finding that. So I had a job prearranged, and that was fine. But then I realized at some point I was going to run out of money. I had accommodation, I had everything, but I was waiting for my first paycheck. And I was probably going to need about 2 weeks worth of food. So the only thing I had was my guitar. So what I did was I Googled top 10 live music venues, Ho Chi Minh City. And then I just harassed them in every way I could. I called them, I sent them messages, I sent them my videos, I called again. And then
What were the venues?
There was Acoustic Bar, Saigon Outcast, what was the other one? I think it closed down. And then there was also places like Rogue. Essentially, all the top 10 places that showed up, I just sent it. And then I found a place named Acoustic Bar. Actually, the guy called me after I sent him stuff, and he says, "Come in for an audition today, too." I did, and I performed a cover song, and he was happy with it, and he said, "Can you play tonight?" I said, "Sure. I don't have any taxi money even. I can't come back." He says, "Oh, don't worry. Here's some taxi money. And when you come back, sing 3 songs and you get $50. The equivalent of $50 US. So I was like, okay, that's easy. 3 songs, $50. And then I did that, and I kept doing that every night for a week, and I fed myself, and then from there I realized, okay, wait, I can actually do something with this. And at that time, at that particular place, it's a covers bar, so they only wanted people to play covers, which is fine. If you want to pay me to sing somebody else's song, I'm not overly ecstatic about it, but it's a living. And eventually, I had been writing and recording music since 2008. So I'd stop and start depending on my situation. So then I turned to the songs that I had written. I had a catalog of songs, and I eventually worked on completing an EP, a full EP, which is now on all major distribution networks. And then also I recorded 7 music videos, and I also directed and edited them myself. This was over the course of a year. So it was definitely a learning process, I could definitely say. But then also, to bring it back to the book, which is what started all of this, part of the book is also to give people a behind-the-scenes look of what it actually takes to, start up as a musician, as an indie musician, the things that you need to do. Because for the followers, all they see are the highlights. But they don't see maybe some points behind. I played a gig once, and the owner of the location was just absolutely livid that I had brought my own cameraman. So I usually film my gigs. And she was just not happy with him. And so I had to play a full 2-hour gig with that in the back of my mind, knowing that I'm going to have to deal with her, and then she was also going to have to pay me. So just those little things, or you organize a tour to go somewhere, and then you're told you can't go into Cambodia because your country doesn't exist. So, so they're
Look, that's
all
an anticipated problem you couldn't anticipate, right? Like, you can try and think ahead, like, right, what could go wrong? What do I need to think about? That your country won't exist. To be honest, a lot of Vietnamese people haven't heard of Scotland. A lot. When I say I'm from Scotland, blank look. And then kind of, once you explain like England, they kind of get it. But because there's not even really a translation, it's just like Scotland.
Ah, right. Yeah.
And many of them I just think haven't heard of it. They know England.
And so, how did you find that experience? Do you have to educate people?
I've not had it in any official capacity, so it's not really been a problem. But it's generally, when someone just go, "Oh, where are you from?" A Vietnamese person, maybe not much English as well, so the conversation can't really go very far. Right. And I'm like, "Oh, Scotland," and you just see the blank look. They're kind of like, yeah. I had a guy ask me in the gym the other day, "Was I Dutch?" I get that every now and again because my accent mostly is not so thick anymore because I've lived away for so long. So most people get confused because they can understand me. Hopefully. Anyone who's a regular listener has probably heard me say this a million times. But people get confused because I'm quite understandable for a Scottish person in quotation marks.
Right.
So when the guy said, "Was I Dutch?" it was because he was kind of like, "Well, I could understand you and you didn't sound English, so I thought maybe you're from like, Holland or something like that."
Oh, wow.
So I get that every now and then.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so you see, these are like the shared experiences. I had, so I mentioned a previous job interview I went to before, and somebody asked me about, my qualifications and whether or not they were in English and all this stuff. And this person, their English proficiency was much lower than mine in that interview. And then they proceeded to ask me, "Hey, have you taken an English proficiency test?" The IELTS more specifically. And I said, "Well, no, I don't need it. Well, why would I need the IELTS? I teach it." And her response was that because your country has 14 languages, which technically, yes, it does. There are many different languages spoken. But once again, if you were to travel to Zimbabwe, all the newspapers, all the government, everything is in English. Yes, there are other languages, but everything is in English. So it's those sorts of little things. But then speaking of that, I once had an Irish friend who was asked the same thing.
Well, at least it's even then.
Yeah, right?
Well, I mean, I've been making fun of Irish people lately when I've been doing stand-up, saying, if they're an English teacher, like, how do you teach the difference between 3 and 3?
Well.
But I asked this, and an Irish person was like, I have to put on an American accent. And you heard my joke, I think, the other day. I mean, I'm the same. I had to teach journalist.
There you go.
And I have to say journalist. Like, I know these things, though. Like, I know that it sounds ridiculous, so I'm like, okay, I have to change it. Mm-hmm. So I assume for an Irish person, if they have to teach the word 3, they're not going to be like 1, 2, 3, because that would just confuse the hell out of those poor students. But so have you had much discrimination in Vietnam in terms of where you're from, things like that? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, it's a challenge in particular industries. If you're working in the ESL industry, it's a challenge. People will look at your qualifications, be interested, get in touch, chat. Okay, please send us your documents, and then sorry, we're looking for native speakers. And then my response is, I am a native speaker. I've been speaking English since I could talk. And then either, and you know how Vietnam can be very direct in some cases, then people would then say either, sorry, we found other more experienced teachers, which is fascinating because I know that that's not necessarily true. And it's a polite way of saying, okay, you know what we're looking for. Or they'll just say, we're looking for real Americans. And I'm like, okay. Some of my American friends tell me I speak better English than them, but okay, go for it. So at first things like that were a challenge, and this is something that I actually do write about. That obviously, if you have certain passports, it makes things easier. But at the same time, there are organizations that, if you work hard enough and you have the qualifications, they will actually consider you. So there's a mixed bag.
And your first name is a very good Scottish first name, especially EW.
Yeah.
I like that. Is that based on any Scottish connection or anything like that? Or?
So this was just my mom and dad, I think. They were probably just very forward-thinking, futuristic people. My name's Stewart. My sister's name is Sally. My brother's name is Adrian. And so
they give you like the whitest names possible, basically. Like they looked up a book of white names. And like, these are the top 3: Sally, Stewart, and Adrian.
Yeah.
There we go.
So part of it also.
Sorry, people maybe can't see you. He's black, by the way.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Just so you know.
If you've not looked at the picture on the podcast.
Right. So the thing with Zimbabwe is that it's also, while it has its history with colonialism and everything else, by and large the culture is very multicultural, multifaceted. It's like a blend of English/American culture meets traditional Zimbabwe culture. You always see different elements of both throughout like daily Zimbabwean life. Drive on the left, drink tea like hell, love Christmas. We kept that.
What about cricket?
Play cricket. Love cricket. I'm struggling to find people who play cricket with me in Ho Chi Minh, actually.
There we go. So if anyone listening that plays cricket, send me an email, put a message on Facebook for Stuart.
There you go. And so, it's funny the way I look at it. And this could be with any other country gaining independence. Right? So what America did when they gained independence, they were like, screw you, we drive on the right now. And we're going to change our numbering system and change this and change this, just to show you that we're not British. In Zimbabwe's case, we gained independence. By and large, kicked out the colonialists, but then, as I've said, we kept the tea, we kept the Jesus, we kept the cricket, we kept all the nice perks, we even kept the classism. So I always find that very fascinating, but then as a result of that, Zimbabwe is a very multicultural society. So you'll find that most people, actually not most, I'll say many people will have English first names and Shona or Ndebele or whichever tribe they're from names as their second name. There are many others who have, traditional first names as well, vice versa. But you find a blend a lot of times.
The reason I ask is because, and J.K. Hobson as well, good friend, he's been on the show twice.
Yeah.
He's talked about, changing his name for job interviews to J.K. because his real name, Jawanza Kalunji,
Right.
doesn't get you in the door, right? Which is terrible. So my wife is Adria Lopez, now Lopez Mackay. And before we were married, we lived in New Zealand, and I bumped into this woman. We were both trying to get jobs within, kind of certain industry, doesn't matter which one. We were trying to get jobs, and I think I'd gotten a job already. She was just temping, and she was looking for work. And I bumped into this recruiter who'd been helping us. And she's so nice, so well-meaning, and she said, and I still feel bad about this because it shows for me how backwards, uneducated, ignorant, I don't know the exact word, but, even being married, not at the time, but married now to a person of colour, I'm still not, wasn't in that mindset. She said to me, she went, well, you're not married yet, are you? And I was like, no. She's like, well, what about your wife just puts down your last name on the form? Because, maybe people see you Lopez and they, because she was having trouble, she hadn't found a job yet. And me being me, I was like, oh yeah, that's a good idea, I'll tell her. And then when I told her, of course, she's like, I'm not going to change my name. They should be hiring me anyway. And then, of course, the penny dropped for me. I'm like, oh yeah, that's totally racist. Or maybe not exactly racist, but she wasn't meaning anything bad by it. She was just giving like a piece of advice. But that again, that opened up my eyes to be like, I mean, I know I'm a white guy, so I'm not exposed to that, right? Like,
Right.
so I don't see that type of racism.
Mm.
And one thing I read recently, in light of the recent kind of Black Lives Matter movement, and talking about this kind of discrimination, is all job applications shouldn't have your name on it.
Just your qualifications.
Just your qualifications. You can have just like an identifying number or whatever to match with. But when it goes to the people who are doing the actual recruitment, all resumes shouldn't have your name on it. And I was like, that's like, it's sad that that's a solution, but that would be a solution, I think, because it takes away that look at the name and be like, oh no, we don't want them, you know?
I don't know how it is in Scotland, but for me, what I noticed when I lived and worked in the US, every sort of job application form had like a checkbox item where you had to identify your race. And it would say for statistics or whatever. So, yeah, usually there's like black, white, Native American, Asian, I think, and other. I would always tick other. And there would be a blank for that other. I would just leave it. I would just put other. And I think I am maybe fortunate in that maybe my first or last name maybe don't necessarily make people think that I'm African American, depending on the context where I am. So and when I think back about this, if my name was Laquan McDonald, I probably would have different stories to tell. With regards to that aspect of life. So I still find that, and you're right, I think that would be a fair way, actually. If you remove people's name and you just see the qualifications, you would want to hire that person based on the qualifications.
Could be a problem when you get to the interview if you're a real racist and it's going to be like, oh, okay, yeah, no.
Right.
And then when you start doing interviews on the telephone where you can't see the person, I mean, we shouldn't have to be that extreme, right? But I mean,
yeah, we shouldn't have to, but I think
if that helps
measures
level the
will.
playing field, then, or not level the playing field, if that helps take away the level of discrimination, then
But then you also face challenges, particularly, I think in Southeast Asia in general, the way English as a second language is marketed, for example. On the billboards, it's mainly, a picture of a Caucasian person teaching an Asian kid. And that's what the marketing side of things, as far as the company is concerned, that's what they're trying to market to the parents. And look, I totally get it. It's like, hey, here's a foreigner's going to teach your kid. That's the attraction. But I think the fact that some organizations have it as a policy to specifically only hire white or white-looking people from certain countries is, I think it sends the wrong message, and it's also not educating people, right? Which is not necessarily right. So part of me actually being in Vietnam is, personally, I feel like one kid at a time, I can change the future of this country just by being in a classroom and doing what a normal teacher does, or doing other things that I love as well.
I never mentioned, I don't think I've ever mentioned on the podcast who I work for, but I mean, if you Google my name, and I'm pretty active on Facebook, anyone would know I work for ILA, and I work at the Community Network, which is the charitable arm of ILA, and I'm extremely proud to work for that company because they don't discriminate. And in terms of you saying marketing, to go back to J.K. Hobson, he's all over their marketing. Like, he's always doing marketing shoots for ILA. Like, anytime you see their promo stuff, there's J.K. at the front. And my wife has done some promo stuff for this. She's like, Mexican background. Mm-hmm. And I'm very proud of that. We've people from, I mean, you've worked for them as well, right? You have Indians, we have a Romanian guy working for us right now because he's a native English speaker. So I'm very proud of that company because they will hire people based on their talent, and everything you're saying does come through from the parents. Like I hear stories, I don't deal with it. I hear stories, and ILA will just be like, nope, they're a teacher. If a parent was to come and be like, we want a native speaker or something like that, they'd be like, they're a native speaker. We hired them, and they don't entertain that. And as part of that, we have to, not we ILA, we as not we, even they as an ESL industry should take it on themselves to educate parents more instead of pandering to that kind of. And I don't even know, I don't know the Vietnamese culture enough. Is it racist or is it just like expectation? Like why do they want that white American teacher?
Well, part of my sort of look back at it is like this. First of all, the image of beauty, number one in Vietnam, is seen as someone who is pale, and that comes traditionally from the fact that if you're pale, it means you're well off. You stay indoors most of the time. You can afford the clothes to cover yourself all the time. And if you're darker, then it means you work in the field or you do something else. That was their.
I was shocked when I learned that for the first time. I didn't realize that until a few years ago. That's where that definition of beauty comes from.
Yeah, right. And so I think that then seeps in because you then had occupation by the French, occupation by the Americans, and then there were wars that followed. And I think that with many nations, if not all, that have been colonized, I think that they have a touch of Stockholm syndrome. In the sense that even though these were the former oppressors,
used to them.
They're like, we kind of like you. Even though you kind of mistreated us, but we kind of like you. So, and not to say that there should be any animosity or anything, but I think that's like a general psyche of most former colonies. I've gotten the sense of that every time I go there. So that's there's those two things, and then you also have media in general, right? By and large, the media that people consume here is okay. They have their own local stuff, but when I talk to many of my kids that I work with in class, they know exactly what's going on with all the trends in the U.S. and what's on Twitter. And they may as well be there. So that is also an influence. So, for example, in a school that will hire American teachers, for example, many of their idea of Americans is white Americans. That's what they would expect. Somebody comes and says, I'm American, and then maybe they're Latina, then people might behave differently. So it's also partially because of dealing with culturally exported stereotypes as well. So I think it's a number of things. But
like you see a show like Friends, for example, which I loved growing up. But as I've grown up, I'm like, it's 6 white people
in
like
New York.
In New York, like it's not. I've lived in New York. It's not a representative sample of New York. And then How I Met Your Mother just continued it, which was another 6 white characters. It was just like you didn't learn anything from. You couldn't have like made it. So I guess that those where that stereotype comes from, right? Like, yeah. Hopefully, though, as people are more exposed to Western culture, people like yourself, people like JK, they see them in more prominent positions and as entertainers, and then the next generation, or even the younger generation in the 20s, 30s, these people would be like, this is not an accurate depiction of Americans.
And by and large, since the question centered around being in Vietnam, personally, I don't think that generally Vietnamese people are racist. I don't think that. I think there's a lot of people who are exposed, for sure. But I wouldn't say that there's anything specific or necessarily systematic that people try to do. So I think sometimes it's just a lack of understanding or a lack of knowledge, lack of exposure.
That's interesting, though. So that's good to hear, though. So you feel that you've not really experienced racism here from Vietnamese people outside of potentially the ESL industry, or can you expand on that?
Well, okay, so I like to make sure that these terms are defined clearly, right?
Sure.
So we can talk about, okay, the extreme. There is racism, right? Then there is racial insensitivity. Then there is racial awareness of yourself, and then racial awareness of the other person. So I feel like a lot of times we are, as a people, quick to say, whoa, this is racist, instead of looking at it specifically and say, oh, okay, well, that was racially insensitive. But the question is, what is your intent in saying this? What were you actually trying to say? And I feel like nowadays, if somebody says something wrong or uses the wrong vocabulary, it's like, oh my God, you're racist. And which I don't necessarily think is the case. I think we need to have specific conversations about it to actually figure out, because there are different fine threads of that are subsets of racism. You can talk about, your systematic, your casual racism, your your basic racial insensitivity that we talked about. So I think it's important to understand specifically what the context is. So I feel, and part of what I do in the book as well, each country that I visit, I rate my experiences of race relations in that country, and it's a star rating system out of 5. And so I can see in each country that I've been to, I lived in Cape Town, South Africa, and I lived in the US. Both countries have issues with race, but it's not the same.
Well, Devin Gray was just on the podcast this season, who's from South Africa, and he told me, I didn't know this, he's like, in South Africa, like, there's a lot of white people who believe that they are a better race than black people. It's not even just racism, like, they still feel like we are different races. And I was like, what? And he's like, yeah, that. And I can't remember the name, but he talks about a comedian in South Africa who's like, no, we got the good racism here. There's like a black comedian there. He's like, we got real racism here. And I was like, wait, I didn't even really think that people still thought on those levels. Like Leonardo DiCaprio in Django Unchained. Like, so is that does that come into your rating system of like?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, another example, like, I think when you think of the U.S., the major problem with race, I think, is largely institutional. Largely. We can talk about policing and over-policing, incarceration or different sentences for the same crime that's committed by, say, a Caucasian. And then we can also talk about stuff like redlining, so financial exclusion. It would be difficult for you to buy a home even though you have what's needed as far as mortgage applications, simply because of the color of your skin. And we can talk about, many other ways, but I feel in the U.S. it's largely institutional.
Not day to day. Is that what you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, my experience, I was living in Kansas City. Most people would be tempted to think, oh my God, it's a racist backwater, just cornfields and Dorothy. But that wasn't my experience at all. Actually, people were really nice. I never felt in any way, shape, or form out of place in that sense. But then you also then get, when you compare it to the South African racism that I experienced, it's in your face. It's not subtle or kind of roundabout way, or you don't get something and then you start thinking, oh, maybe it's because of that. No, it's just in your face and there's nothing you can do about it. I remember moving into a new apartment. I was living in a place called Somerset West in Cape Town. And I moved into the new apartment. My housemate was a white South African. So he was gone to work, I was at home. And then a neighbor from all the way across the other block came up to my apartment. She knocked and she just started questioning me. It's like, who are you? How long are you going to be staying here? Did you buy the place? So I was just confused. And so I just, at the time I was working for an engineering company, I just pulled out my business card and I gave it to her and I said, if you have any questions, just call my boss. He'll explain everything. And she just disappeared. Or at a place where I was working, I had an individual who would come in and just start the morning off with a racial joke. Oh, hey, Stewart. There was a Chinese guy and a black guy and an Irish guy. I'm like, oh, no. I need to get moving. So I feel like, and also on the South African side, since I worked in the construction industry, I also saw, I worked for a huge construction company with franchises across the world in the head office. But I was the only black person in the entire company, thousands of employees, and that just didn't make sense to me. So by and large, the economy as well in South Africa is still very much exclusively white run. So the barriers you'll face there in South Africa, your ceiling is much thicker, definitely much thicker. Whereas if I go to the US, even with all the institutional problems, I can do better than I would in South Africa as far as just based on my merit. Yeah.
My last guest lives in Cyprus. So tell me about Cyprus.
Cyprus was fascinating.
She lives in Paphos.
Great. So I moved to Cyprus after having been in the US for a while. I just felt I needed a change. And so I had friends from Cyprus that I went to school with in Kansas City. And so I decided to go abroad, and then I did an exchange program. And I spent 6 months living on the Turkish side of the island, and then I spent another 6 months living on the Greek side. And what I absolutely loved is that I went to a place in the northern part of Cyprus. A friend of mine took me to some remote villages. And obviously America with all its history and racial tensions and everything else. I traveled to Cyprus and we go to this remote village and everyone wanted to invite me into their home, give me tea, and Turkish meatballs, and it was almost a confusing experience to me because these people were so nice, like it was just who they were. And I've never had a feeling like that anywhere else. Like I just felt so welcome and loved, and people didn't actually care. Like they weren't concerned about where I was from. They were just concerned about me as a person. And so I really love that, and especially considering this was the northern part of Cyprus. So because of Cyprus's history, it's divided, and the northern part is less economically advanced. But on the southern Greek side, that's where all the European Union money comes in, looks super developed, nice roads, everything, great tourist destinations. But I can tell you that the people in the north treated me better than the people on the Greek side. And context here is important. On the Greek side of the island, actually in the entire island, there's a huge problem migrants. Migrants coming from Northern Africa into Europe. And so on the Greek side, I think that problem is bigger because that's the EU side, so everyone's trying to get in. So I almost felt like I was asked about where I was from more often on that side of the island. Or, just random strangers, oh, hey, where are you from? What are you doing here? Usually that's a polite thing, but the sense I got there was it's almost like verifying you're not like an illegal. But aside from that experience, as far as diversity goes, on the Greek side of the island, I definitely experienced much more diversity. I met people from Sweden and Norway, and even learned a few phrases in Swedish. And I met people from the UK, the US, just the whole world, Russia. So that was also just a nice experience of like a melting pot / tourist destination, which was really good. And out of all that, I actually ended up picking up a few Turkish phrases because at that time on the northern part of the island, there weren't that many people yet who spoke English, so I was forced to learn, through a combination of charades and and learning basic vocab. I was able to string some stuff together. Yeah.
So out of all the countries you visited, then just quick answer, what's your favorite?
Northern Cyprus because of that village.
That cool. Nice. Well, what we'll do then, we'll move on to finish up to the end to our final questions that I'm going to ask everyone at the end of this season. And so the first one is, there's over 7 million bikes in Saigon. And traffic laws here kind of seem to be more of a guideline. What's an unwritten road rule that you couldn't live without?
In Saigon.
Saigon or Vietnam. But yeah.
If you don't start driving 5 seconds before the light turns green, you will get on my nerves.
On your nerves?
I've become Vietnamese about this.
You're Vietnamese then. I've been trying to work that into my material on stage for since I've started doing comedy. I just haven't thought of a funny way to say it yet. But yeah, that's one of my biggest bugbears as well. When you're at the front and it's not even green yet, and the guy 5 cars behind is honking, and it's like, dude, inertia? That I have to see the light start it, rev the engine, get some momentum going. Because there's the Bill Hicks joke, have you heard that one, where he talks about he's watching the light and then he misses the light and the guy behind him beeps and things like this. And so I don't want to copy his joke too much, so that's why I've not been able to use that. But that gets me So now you're that person though. If you're beeping the horn if someone's not moved as soon as it turns green, or even before it turns green.
Well, I mean, my thing is this. I honestly believe that all of us driving here in Ho Chi Minh need a driving lesson. All of us. But I also think that organized chaos works.
Somehow it does.
Yeah, somehow.
And so you said you picked up some Turkish phrases. What's your most useful Vietnamese phrase?
Choba, Konga, Bachung, Mangbe.
Okay, so say it again. I think I can translate that.
So, wait, did I say it correct? Choba, Konga, Bachung, Mangbe.
Very good. Chicken rice with egg, takeaway.
Yeah,
I didn't get the first bit.
What's supposed to be choba, which is give me a bowl.
Oh, okay.
Give me a bowl of rice and chicken and an egg. Takeaway.
When you said choba, was is it dog? Is it market? Is it
Once again, my Vietnamese pronunciation sucks.
Well, I don't know either. I just know the vague differences. So I was like, is he asking for dog meat there? No, I don't think so.
I could end up with that if I say it wrong.
You could, yeah. So what's your favorite sunset spot in Saigon?
My favorite sunset spot in Saigon is at a building called Cao Dat in District 5. I used to live there. That was the first place I lived at. And I would take the elevator, then take the stairs all the way to the rooftop. And it is a beautiful 360 view of the entire city.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, those little hidden, not even a hidden spot, it's like your own personal.
Yeah.
There's one of the last episode, the guest who lives in Cyprus, and she's not actually from Saigon, she's from Hanoi originally.
Oh.
And she's like, why are you asking that question, just out of interest? I was like, the sunsets are just beautiful here. And if you get like a good spot, if you get a rooftop or rooftop bar or somewhere, it can be just stunning, yeah. So would you rather live in Saigon now or 20 years ago?
I would rather live in Saigon now, simply because of the variety of districts. You have some districts that are ultra-modern, very futuristic. You think you live in a Western country. Then you also have some really local Vietnamese districts as well that help you get in touch with the culture. So I would have to say now, because there are less snakes, less swamps, and more of a variety of places to go and visit.
That's cool, going to different districts. Me and my wife have talked about doing that, but we never have. So what's your favourite district?
Oh my goodness. Can I do a top three?
Go on.
All right. So number 3 would have to be District 8. That's a good place. And what I like about it is that there's not much visible Western influence within the district. It's got very good food, some very good hidden street food places, and also living in this district forces you to learn Vietnamese in some way, shape, or form. And so, moving on to number 2, it would have to be District 1, because that's CBD. That's where most of the happening stuff is, and there are also many hidden gems as well. Like District 1 taught me, all my life, people have been telling me, don't walk down an dirty alley 3 a.m. in the morning. But in District 1 and Ho Chi Minh as an extension, I feel totally comfortable walking down any alley at any time. And then number 1, I would have to say, is District 3. And that's because I used to live in a place close to the canal. And on the canal, there are a lot of good places, restaurants, and you can go for a walk as well. And then also, it also has a lot of like hidden gems as well.
It's true, man.
You can find a lot of variety. I'm a bit of a foodie as well. So.
Right. We could do a whole other episode on that. So we'll finish there. So before we do finish, so tell our listeners, where can they find you? Where can they follow you? Where can they get your book? Where can they watch you play music? Right. Give us everything that you've got going on right now. So
I just recently published my first book, and that's available on Amazon. And then for people in Vietnam, they can order it direct from me. So they can find me on Facebook or Instagram. And then my EP, Songs on My Bike, that's available on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Music, any major distribution. And as far as future plans, my next sort of major step would be to work on an audiobook and then also an official song to support the audiobook as well.
Cool.
So that's my next major project.
And you perform all over Saigon, right?
Right, yes. So I performed in most major places, District 1, District 2, D3 as well. And then I also just like finding small little hole-in-the-wall places as well to kind of, it's nice to, as an indie author, to also work with someone that you can support each other. So,
cool.
Yeah.
So I'll put all of that in the notes for the show. So if anyone wants to find Stewart, you can look in the show notes, click on the links, and you'll be able to find him, download the book, listen to the album, and all that good stuff. So thank you so much for joining me. It's been awesome to chat with you. I always enjoy it, and thank you.
Yeah, I had a really good time. Yeah, maybe I'll come back and we'll talk about food next time.
I'll do a new podcast based on food.
Sounds good.
Hột vịt lộn, hột vịt sữa, trứng cút lộn, mắm xào đây. Mắm xào đây.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you're like me, you may use your laptop at places where you have to use public Wi-Fi. This opens you up to digital snoopers. It's a massive problem. It can be your internet service provider, or you know who, looking at what you do online, or a cyber criminal trying to steal your bank passwords or credit card info, or even a hacker at the next table trying to steal your sensitive data. These days, it is vital that you keep your data safe. NordVPN keeps all of these snoopers away. It makes your internet activity private, protects you from accessing dangerous websites that are phishing for your data, and lets you enjoy your favorite content securely, even while away from home. And it's easy to use, even I could use it. I've actually been using NordVPN for years now here in Vietnam, and I'm excited to be an affiliate partner with them. I've used NordVPN to watch Netflix, BBC, Disney Plus with ease. And I also know that my information and data are safe from prying eyes, whoever they may be. Join now and you'll get 68% off and 3 months free when you go to my link, nordvpn.com/SMB. Just again, for those hard of hearing, nordvpn.com/SMB. The link is also in the show notes. I know nobody checks them out, but go check that out and you can get the link from wherever you're listening to this podcast. As an affiliate partner, it also means that I will get a small commission when you sign up, but at no extra cost to you. So not only will you be getting a great deal through 7 Million Bikes, you get a great VPN and you'll be supporting 7 Million Bikes podcast. Stay safe online and enjoy the shows you love. Any questions, just let me know. You know how to get in touch with me. And thanks for listening to this show. Cheers.